The knife glinted in the moonlight as Victor Dawson pressed it against his sister's throat, his voice a venomous whisper, "You'll die before you speak another word about what you saw." But Clara Dawson had already made her choice. Death was better than silence, and this winter night in 1881 would either end her life or begin it anew. My friends, welcome to a tale of survival, betrayal, and unexpected love in the harsh Wyoming frontier. Stay with me until the end, and please comment your city below. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. The wind howled through the narrow alleys of Willow Creek like a wounded animal, carrying with it the bitter promise of another killing frost. Clara Dawson pressed herself deeper into the shadows between the general store and the abandoned millinery shop, her thin shawl offering no protection against the December cold that seemed determined to freeze the very marrow in her bones. She had been hiding here for 3 days now, surviving on scraps stolen from behind the hotel kitchen and melted snow for water. Her fingers, once elegant and skilled at embroidery, were now blue-tinged and raw, barely able to grip the torn fabric she clutched around her shoulders. The town slept uneasily around her windows, shuddered against both the cold and the kind of trouble that walked on two legs after dark. Clara knew she couldn't stay hidden much longer. Her body was failing. She could feel it in the way her legs trembled when she tried to stand in the fog that crept around the edges of her vision when she moved too quickly. 23 years old, and she felt ancient, worn down to nothing by hunger and fear. Well, what do we have here?" The voice sliced through her exhausted haze like a blade. Clara's head snapped up to see a massive figure blocking the mouth of the alley. Butch Morrison swayed slightly, the stench of whiskey preceding him as he lumbered closer. She recognized him from her previous life before everything had shattered as one of the ranch hands who frequented the saloons and brothels with equal enthusiasm. "Ain't you the Dawson girl?" He squinted in the dim light filtering from the street. "The one whose brother's been asking about Saeed, you went crazy stole from the family." His laugh was ugly wet. "Don't look so high and mighty now, do you?" Clara tried to press herself through the wall behind her, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong. Just leave me be." "Leave you be?" Morrison stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gaps in his yellowed teeth. "Now why would I do that when your brother's offering good money for information about you?" "Course." His eyes traveled over her huddled form with a look that made her skin crawl. "Might be I could be persuaded to forget I saw you, for the right price." "I have no money," Clara managed, though her throat felt like it was closing. "Didn't say nothing about money." His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with bruising force. "You're half frozen already. Come with me, warm up in my room above the saloon. Be nice to me, and maybe I forget to mention to Victor Dawson that his sister's hiding in the garbage like a rat." Clara tried to pull away, but she was too weak. 3 days without proper food nights spent shivering instead of sleeping. Her body had nothing left to fight with. Morrison yanked her to her feet and her knees buckled immediately. He caught her with a laugh that turned her stomach. "Can't even stand. This'll be easier than I thought. Let her go." The new voice was quiet, controlled, but it carried an authority that made Morrison freeze. A man stepped from the deeper shadows at the far end of the alley, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard. As he moved into the weak light, Clara saw the scar first, a pale line that ran from his left temple down across his cheek, disappearing into the collar of his coat. His eyes were gray, the color of winter storm clouds, and they were fixed on Morrison with an intensity that made the larger man take an involuntary step back. "This ain't your business, Mercer," Morrison slurred, but his grip on Clara loosened slightly. John Mercer. Clara knew the name, though she'd never met the man. He owned one of the largest ranches outside of town, but he rarely came to Willow Creek, and when he did, he conducted his business quickly and left. The gossip said he'd been engaged once years ago before the scar, before he'd become a recluse. "I'm making it my business," John said, still in that same calm tone. "Let her go, Morrison, now. Or what? You gonna shoot me over some thieving whore?" The word had barely left Morrison's mouth when John moved. It was so fast, Clara almost missed it. One moment he was standing still. The next, Morrison was on his knees in the dirty snow, clutching his stomach where John's fist had connected. John hadn't even changed expression. "The lady is coming with me," John said, stepping around Morrison's retching form. He shrugged off his heavy coat and held it out to Clara, carefully not touching her, giving her the choice. "Can you walk?" Clara stared at him, unable to process what was happening. The coat hung between them, an offering she didn't understand. Why are you... Because it's below freezing, you're about to collapse, and despite what this town might think, I'm not in the habit of leaving people to die in alleys. His voice softened slightly. "Take the coat. Please." With trembling fingers, Clara reached for the coat. It was still warm from his body, and the weight of it nearly buckled her knees again. This time John did steady her, his touch light and impersonal on her elbow. "My wagon's just around the corner," he said. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, will have soup on the stove and a warm bed ready." "I can't pay you." Clara whispered the words, automatic. In her experience, kindness always came with a price. John's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gray eyes. "I'm not Morrison, Miss Dawson. I don't trade in desperation." He began guiding her toward the street, but Clara pulled back weakly. "You know who I am. I know Victor Dawson claims his sister stole from him and disappeared. I also know Victor Dawson is a liar, and worse." He paused, looking down at her with those unsettling gray eyes. "The question is whether you trust me enough to accept help, or whether you'd prefer to take your chances here." Behind them, Morrison was struggling to his feet, cursing. Clara looked at the alley that had been her refuge and prison for 3 days, then at the man offering her escape. She didn't trust him. She couldn't afford to trust anyone, but she was out of options. "All right," she breathed. John nodded once, as if she'd just agreed to a business transaction, and led her to a modest wagon waiting on Main Street. He helped her up onto the bench, his hands careful and respectful, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled out of town, Clara huddled in his coat, trying to understand what had just happened. She'd been prepared for death, or worse, in that alley. She hadn't been prepared for rescue, especially not from a scarred rancher who looked at her like she was a person instead of a problem. "Why?" she asked as they left the last buildings behind and headed into the open range. "Why help me, Gum?" John was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I know what it's like to have the world look at you and see only what they want to see. And because Victor Dawson tried to buy my land 6 months ago. When I refused, he tried other methods, less pleasant ones." He glanced at her. "I suspect you know something about his less pleasant methods." Clara pulled the coat tighter, remembering Victor's hand around her throat. His threats, the documents she'd seen that had started everything. "I know too much about them." "Then we have something in common." John returned his attention to the road. "Get some rest if you can. It's an hour to the ranch." Clara wanted to stay awake, to stay alert for whatever trap this might be, but exhaustion was a weight she couldn't fight anymore. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the unexpected warmth of the coat pulled her under. Her last coherent thought was that John Mercer smelled like leather and wood smoke and safety, though she'd forgotten what safety was supposed to feel like. She woke when the wagon stopped, confused and disoriented. They were in front of a 2-story ranch house, warm light spilling from the windows. It wasn't grand like her father's house had been, but it was solid, welcoming in a way that had nothing to do with size or ornament. "Easy," John said as she tried to sit up too quickly and swayed. "Mrs. Chen," he called toward the house. The door opened immediately, revealing a small, neat Chinese woman who took in the scene with sharp black eyes. "Bring her in," she said without preamble. "The guest room is ready." "You were expecting company?" Clara asked weakly as John helped her down from the wagon. "I told her I might find someone in need tonight," John said simply. "She's learned not to question my instincts." Mrs. Chen tisked as she got a good look at Clara. "Skin and bones. When did you last eat a proper meal?" "Child?" Clara couldn't remember. Before she'd fled her brother's house, that had been nearly a week ago. "I'm not sure." "Men," Mrs. Chen muttered, though it wasn't clear if she meant Victor Morrison or men in general. "Come. Bath first, then food, then bed. You—" She pointed at John. "Go away. This is women's business now." John actually smiled slightly, just a quirk of his lips, but it transformed his scarred face. "Yes, ma'am." He looked at Clara. "You're safe here, Miss Dawson. You have my word." Clara wanted to tell him that words meant nothing, that she'd heard promises before, but she was too tired. She let Mrs. Chen lead her into the house, into warmth and light that seemed almost painful after so long in the cold. The bath was heaven. Mrs. Chen had to help her undress, clicking her tongue at the bruises on Clara's arms, the marks Victor had left. She said nothing, just helped Clara into the hot water and began gently washing her hair. "Mr. John is a good man," Mrs. Chen said quietly as she worked. "Lonely, but good. He doesn't bring people here often." "Why did he bring me?" Clara asked, luxuriating despite herself in the first hot bath she'd had in a week. "Maybe because he sees himself in lost things," Mrs. Chen said cryptically. "Or maybe because he knows what wolves look like, and he doesn't like seeing them hunt." After the bath, Mrs. Chen helped her into a clean nightgown, simple but soft, and led her to the kitchen where a bowl of soup waited. Clara's hands shook as she lifted the spoon. The first taste nearly made her cry. It was just vegetable soup with some beef. Nothing fancy, but after days of scraps and snow, it tasted like a feast. John appeared in the doorway as she was finishing. He'd removed his coat. She realized she was still wearing it earlier, and rolled up his sleeves. The scar extended down his neck, she noticed, disappearing under his collar. "Better?" he asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. There's a lock on the inside if it makes you feel safer. Tomorrow, if you're up to it, we can discuss what comes next." "What comes next?" Clara repeated. The soup suddenly felt heavy in her stomach. "Mr. Mercer, I appreciate your kindness, but I can't. I don't have any way to repay you." "I'm not asking for repayment. Everyone wants something." John studied her for a long moment, and Clara saw something in his eyes. She recognized old pain, the kind that never quite healed. "What I want, Miss Dawson, is to offer you a job. I need help with the ranch accounts. Mrs. Chen tells me I'm terrible at keeping the books, and she's tired of trying to decipher my handwriting. Room board and wages. Fair work for fair pay." Clara stared at him. "You don't even know me. I could be everything my brother says." "Are you?" The simple question stopped her cold. "No." "Then that's all I need to know for now." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Whatever hold Victor thinks he has on you, whatever he's threatened, you don't face it alone anymore. That's not charity, Miss Dawson. That's just how things work on my ranch. We protect our own." After he left, Clara sat in the warm kitchen trying to process everything. Mrs. Chen bustled around cleaning up, occasionally patting Clara's shoulder as she passed. "You don't trust him," Mrs. Chen observed. "That's smart, but Mr. John, he keeps his word. Always has, even when it cost him." She gestured to the stairs. "Go rest, child. Tomorrow is soon enough for worrying." Clara climbed the stairs on unsteady legs, finding the room John had indicated. It was simple but clean, with a bed that looked impossibly soft, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the range. True to his word, there was a sturdy lock on the inside of the door. She turned the lock, then stood in the middle of the room, overwhelmed. This morning she'd woken up freezing in an alley, certain she'd die before the week was out. Now she was warm, fed, clean, and safe, or as safe as she could be with Victor still hunting her. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "It's just me, dear." Mrs. Chen's voice came through. "I'm leaving some clothes outside your door for tomorrow. They might be a bit big, but they'll do until we can get you proper things." Clara waited until she heard footsteps retreating before opening the door a crack. A neat pile of clothes sat on the floor, a simple dress, undergarments, stockings, even a pair of boots. She brought them inside quickly, locking the door again. The bed was as soft as it looked. Clara sank into it, pulling the quilts up to her chin. For the first time in a week, she wasn't cold. For the first time in longer than that, someone had helped her without demanding payment. She didn't trust it, couldn't trust it. But for tonight, she would let herself rest. Sleep came quickly, but it wasn't peaceful. She dreamed of Victor's face twisted with rage, his hands reaching for her throat. She dreamed of documents burning, of names and numbers that could destroy him if anyone believed her. She dreamed of her father turning his back as Victor dragged her away, choosing his son over his daughter like he always had. She woke with a gasp, disoriented in the darkness. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, and panic clawed at her throat. Then she heard it, the steady tick of a clock somewhere in the house, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of the house settling, ranch sounds. Safe sounds. A board creaked in the hallway, and Clara froze. Footsteps, slow and measured, paused outside her door. She held her breath, waiting for the handle to turn, for Victor to have found her somehow. "Miss Dawson," John's voice quiet and careful. "I heard you cry out. Are you all right?" Clara released her breath shakily. "Yes, I'm sorry. Just a dream." "No need to apologize." A pause. "I'll be in my study if you need anything. It's just downstairs, first door on the left." She listened to his footsteps retreat, confused by the consideration. In her father's house and Victor's house, no one had ever checked on her nightmares. They'd been as much a part of her life as breathing, especially after her mother died. Clara lay back down but couldn't return to sleep. Instead, she stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of John Mercer. The scar suggested violence in his past, but his hands had been gentle. He'd defended her against Morrison without hesitation, but he hadn't tried to touch her himself. He offered her work, not charity, as if he understood that dignity mattered as much as survival. As dawn light began creeping through the window, Clara made a decision. She would take the job, work hard, save every penny she could. And when she had enough, she would run far from Wyoming, far from Victor, far from anyone who knew the name Dawson. She would become someone else, someone who had never been broken. It was a good plan, a sensible plan. She didn't yet know that John Mercer had a way of undoing plans, or that sometimes being saved meant more than just surviving. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Clara?" Mrs. Chen's voice. "Breakfast is ready when you are." Clara rose, dressed in the borrowed clothes that were indeed too large but clean and warm, and ventured downstairs. The house in daylight was different. She could see it was well-maintained but sparse, functional rather than decorative. A man's house except for touches that must be Mrs. Chen's, doing a vase of dried flowers, clean curtains, a rag rug that added warmth to the wooden floors. The kitchen smelled of bacon and coffee. John was already at the table reading what looked like correspondence. He glanced up when she entered, and Clara was struck again by those gray eyes, alert, intelligent, giving nothing away. "Miss Dawson, I trust you slept—" Yes, thank you." Mrs. Chen set a plate in front of her, eggs, bacon, toast, more food than Clara had seen in one place in weeks. Her stomach cramped with want, but she forced herself to eat slowly, properly, the way her mother had taught her. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said between bites. "The job. I accept if it's still available." John nodded. "Good. Can you start today?" Clara almost smiled at his directness. "I suppose I can." "The accounts are a disaster," he warned. "I haven't properly updated them in months. Mrs. Chen threatens me daily, but numbers were never my strong suit." "Mr. John runs this ranch like clockwork," Mrs. Chen interjected, setting down more coffee. "But ask him to write it down proper. Might as well ask a horse to sing opera." This time Clara did smile, just slightly. "I'm good with numbers. My mother insisted I learn." "Your mother was a smart woman," John said quietly. Clara looked at him sharply. "You knew her." "I met her once years ago, at a social in town. She was kind to a young man with a new scar who everyone else was staring at." He touched his face absently, then seemed to catch himself. "She had a way of seeing past surfaces." Clara's throat tightened. Her mother had been like that kind to everyone, regardless of station or appearance. It had driven Victor crazy, her democratic approach to humanity. "She died 3 years ago," Clara said softly. "I know. I'm sorry." They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. Then John led her to his study, and Clara understood what he meant about the accounts. Papers covered every surface: receipts, invoices, correspondence, all in various states of organization, or rather, disorganization. "It's not as bad as it looks," John said, though he sounded unconvinced himself. Clara picked up a handful of papers, scanning them quickly. "You're right. It's worse." John actually laughed, a short, surprised sound that transformed his face again. "Honest, I appreciate that. Would you prefer I lie?" "No, I've had enough of liars." His expression darkened momentarily, and Clara wondered what had put that look on his face. "I'll leave you to it. If you need anything, just ask Mrs. Chen." He left her alone in the study, and Clara began sorting through the chaos. It was familiar work she'd helped manage her father's household accounts before Victor had taken over everything, before everything had gone wrong. As she worked, she found herself relaxing incrementally. This was something she could control, something she was good at. Numbers didn't lie or threaten or demand things she couldn't give. They simply were. By noon, she had established some semblance of order. Mrs. Chen brought her lunch on a tray, staying to chat while Clara ate. "You're the first person he's allowed in this room in 2 years," Mrs. Chen observed. "Even I'm not permitted to clean in here." "Why?" Mrs. Chen shrugged. "Mr. John has his reasons, usually good ones." She studied Clara with those sharp eyes. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question. Clara set down her sandwich carefully. "Yes." "Will it follow you here?" Clara thought of Victor, of his rage when he'd discovered what she'd seen, what she knew. "Probably." Mrs. Chen nodded as if this was expected. "Mr. John is good at dealing with problems that follow people. Had to deal with his own, after all." "What happened to him?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Chen's expression closed off. "That's his story to tell if he chooses. But I'll say this, the scar isn't the worst thing that was done to him, just the most visible." She left Clara to ponder that, returning to her work in the kitchen. Clara tried to focus on the accounts, but her mind kept wandering to John Mercer and his mysteries. What had happened to his fiancée, who had scarred him? Why did he live out here, isolated from town society? The afternoon wore on, and Clara made good progress despite her distraction. She was deep in calculating feed costs when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses riding fast. Her blood turned to ice. Victor had found her. She crept to the window, peering out carefully. 3 men were dismounting in the yard, and her heart nearly stopped when she recognized one of them, Tom Bradley, one of Victor's hired thugs. The other 2 she didn't know, but they had the same hard look. John emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, but held casually, not quite threatening. Clara couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Bradley gesture toward the house, saw John shake his head. The conversation grew heated, Bradley stepping forward aggressively. John didn't raise the rifle, but something in his stance changed. Even from the window, Clara could see the other men take a step back. More words were exchanged. Then Bradley and his companions remounted and rode off, but not before Bradley looked directly at the study window. He'd seen her. Clara sank into the chair, shaking. It was over. Victor knew where she was. He would come for her, and John Mercer, for all his kindness, couldn't stop him. No one could stop Victor when he wanted something. The study door opened, and John entered, his expression grim. "They're gone." "They'll be back," Clara whispered, "with more men, with Victor." "Let them come." Clara looked up at him, startled by the steel in his voice. "You don't understand. Victor has money influence. He can destroy you." "He can try." John moved to the window, watching the dust from the rider's departure settle. "What does he have on you, Miss Dawson? What is he so afraid you'll reveal?" Clara hesitated. She'd told no one, not even when she'd had the chance. Who would believe her over Victor? "I saw documents," she said finally. "Financial records. He's been embezzling from investors fraudulent land deals, forged signatures, including our father's. He's stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars." John turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "Do you have proof?" "I had copies. He found them when he searched my room. That's when—" She touched her throat unconsciously, remembering Victor's hands there. "That's when I ran." "But you could testify to what you saw. Who would believe me? I'm just a woman, and Victor's already spread the story that I'm mad that I stole from the family. He's probably even manufactured evidence by now." John was quiet for a moment, then moved to his desk, pulling out paper and ink. "Write down everything you remember, every detail, every name, every amount. Date it and sign it." "Why?" "Because Judge Whitaker in Cheyenne is an honest man and he owes me a favor. Because the Federal Marshal Service has been investigating suspicious land deals in the territory. And because your word might not be enough alone, but it's a start." Clara stared at him. "You would do that?" Get involved in this. I already am involved. The moment I took you from that alley, I became part of this. He met her eyes steadily. I told you, Miss Dawson, we protect our own here. You're under my protection now, whether your brother likes it or not. I'm not your responsibility. No, he agreed. You're not. But I'm choosing to help anyway. The question is whether you'll let me. Clara looked at this strange, scarred man who kept surprising her. She thought of the alternative running again, always looking over her shoulder, waiting for Victor to find her. At least here, she wouldn't be alone. All right, she said, picking up the pen. I'll write it all down. As she began writing, John settled into a chair across from her, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. His presence was oddly comforting, solid, steady, reliable. She'd known him less than a day, but already she felt safer with him than she'd felt in years. The sun was setting by the time she finished, her hand cramped from writing. John read through the pages, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Your brother is worse than I thought, he said finally. He wasn't always, Clara said quietly. When we were children, he was different, kind even. But after Mother died, something changed. Father started grooming him to take over the business, and Victor discovered he liked power, liked what money could buy, liked making people afraid. Power corrupts, John said simply. I've seen it before. Is that what happened to you? The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Someone with power hurt you. John touched his scar reflexively. In a way, but that's a story for another time. He stood taking the pages she'd written. I'll send these to Judge Whitaker tomorrow. Tonight we prepare for your brother's visit. You think he'll come tonight? No, he'll wait, gather more men, try to make a show of force. Victor Dawson strikes me as a man who likes an audience. John moved to the door, then paused. Can you shoot? Clara blinked at the unexpected question. My mother taught me. She said a woman should know how to defend herself. Smart woman indeed. There's a pistol in the top drawer of the desk. Keep it with you. After he left, Clara found the pistol, a small but serviceable piece, well maintained like everything else in John's house. She checked that it was loaded, then set it within reach as she returned to organizing the accounts. But concentration was impossible now. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow could be Victor coming for her. When Mrs. Chen called her for dinner, Clara nearly declined, but her stomach's demands won out. John was already at the table, and Clara noticed he'd positioned himself where he could see both the front door and the window. His rifle leaned against the wall within easy reach. You're frightening, Miss Clara, Mrs. Chen scolded, serving stew. Good, John said. Fear keeps you alert. Complacency gets you killed. Speaking from experience, Clara asked. Yes. The single word carried weight finality. They ate in tense silence, everyone listening for sounds that didn't belong. But the night passed peacefully, and eventually Clara returned to her room. The pistol a comfortable weight in her pocket. She didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion claimed her anyway. She dreamed not of Victor this time, but of gray eyes and scarred hands of safety that might not be an illusion after all. She woke to shouting. Clara bolted upright, heart pounding. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky pale pink. The shouting came again, Victor's voice demanding John come out and face him like a man. Clara dressed quickly, hands shaking as she fumbled with buttons. The pistol went into her pocket. She crept downstairs, finding Mrs. Chen already at the window. How many? Clara whispered. 6, including your brother. Mrs. Chen didn't seem particularly concerned. Mr. John is already outside. Clara peered out and saw John standing on the porch, rifle cradled casually in his arms. Victor sat his horse like a king, holding court, flanked by his hired men. Hand over my sister Mercer and we can avoid unpleasantness, Victor was saying. Miss Dawson is my employee, John replied calmly. She's free to leave if she chooses. Are you choosing to leave Miss Dawson? Clara realized he'd known she was listening. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch, trying to project more courage than she felt. No, Mr. Mercer. I'm not. Victor's face darkened when he saw her. Clara, you've caused enough trouble. Come home immediately. That's not my home anymore, Victor. It stopped being home when you tried to strangle me. Lies, Victor spat. You see, Mercer? She's delusional. I'm her legal guardian. I'm 23 years old, Clara interrupted, well past the age of needing a guardian. Father named me executor of his estate, which you've been stealing from. The words burst out before Clara could stop them. I know about the false accounts, Victor, the forged signatures, all of it. Victor went very still, and Clara recognized the dangerous calm before his storms. You always were too curious for your own good sister. Mr. Mercer, I'll make you a deal. Give her to me and I'll forget you were involved in this. I'll even buy your ranch for twice what it's worth. Not interested, John said 3 times. The answer's still no. Victor's composure cracked. You scarred freak. You think you're protecting her. You think she'll thank you. She's using you. Can't you see that? The minute she gets what she wants, she'll leave you just like... The rifle shot split the morning air. Victor's hat flew off his head and his horse danced nervously. The next one won't miss, John said quietly. Get off my land, Dawson. Don't come back. Victor's hand moved toward his gun, but one of his men caught his arm. Not here, boss. Not now. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Victor smiled a cold, cruel expression that made Clara shiver. This isn't over, he said. I'll be back with the sheriff with papers, legal documents. You can't fight the law, Mercer. I can if the law's been bought, John replied. Victor wheeled his horse around savagely. 2 days, Clara. You have 2 days to come to your senses. After that, I won't be responsible for what happens. They rode off in a cloud of dust, and Clara found herself trembling. John's hand touched her shoulder lightly. You did well, he said. He'll come back. With more men, like he said. Let him. John turned to go inside, then paused. Why didn't you leave with him? It might have been safer. Clara thought about it, about the strange trust she'd developed for this scarred rancher in such a short time. Because for the first time in my life, someone stood up for me. That's worth the risk. Something shifted in John's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Come inside. Mrs. Chen's making breakfast, and we need to plan. As Clara followed him in, she realized something had changed. She wasn't just hiding anymore. She was making a stand, and somehow she'd found the one person in Wyoming willing to stand with her. The morning after Victor's threat hung heavy in the air as Clara helped Mrs. Chen clear the breakfast dishes. Her hands trembled slightly, making the china rattle, and she forced herself to breathe deeply. 2 days. Victor had given them 2 days before he returned with whatever fabricated legal documents he could manufacture. John had disappeared into his study after breakfast, leaving Clara to wonder if he was already regretting his involvement in her troubles. Stop that thinking, Mrs. Chen said sharply, taking a plate from Clara's unsteady hands. Mr. John doesn't make decisions lightly. If he says you stay, you stay. But I've brought danger to his door, Clara said softly. Victor won't stop. He never does when someone defies him. Mrs. Chen snorted. You think Mr. John afraid of danger, child? That man has faced worse than your brother's tantrums. She paused, studying Clara with those penetrating dark eyes. The question is whether you trust him enough to accept his help. Before Clara could respond, John appeared in the doorway. Miss Dawson, I need to show you something. She followed him outside to the barn where he led her past the horse stalls to a small room at the back. Inside was a desk covered with papers, but these were different from the chaos of his study. These were organized, methodical, and as Clara looked closer, her breath caught. These are about Victor, she whispered, picking up a newspaper clipping about a suspicious land deal. I started collecting information 6 months ago after he tried to force me to sell, John said, leaning against the doorframe. Your brother has made many enemies, Miss Dawson. You're not the only one who's noticed his crimes. Clara read through the documents with growing amazement. Reports of forged deeds, testimonies from cheated investors, even a letter from a banker expressing concerns about irregular transactions. How did you get all this? I have friends in useful places. Judge Whitaker isn't the only honest man left in Wyoming. John moved closer, pointing to a particular document. This came last month. A federal investigation into territorial land fraud. Your brother's name appears frequently. Then why hasn't he been arrested? Lack of direct evidence. The people who could testify are either paid off or too frightened. John met her eyes. Until now. Clara understood what he was saying. With her testimony combined with what he'd gathered, they might have enough to bring Victor down. But it would mean putting herself in even greater danger, becoming the public face of accusations against a powerful man. "I need time to think," she said. "Take all the time you need. Just remember we have less than 2 days before he returns." That afternoon, Clara tried to focus on the ranch accounts, but her mind kept wandering. Through the window, she watched John working with the horses, his movements confident and sure. There was something calming about his presence, the way he handled the animals with firm gentleness. She found herself wondering again about his past, about the fiancée Mrs. Chen had mentioned. A rider approaching fast interrupted her thoughts. Clara's hand went immediately to the pistol in her pocket, but John seemed unconcerned, raising a hand in greeting as the rider dismounted. The man was younger than John, with sandy hair and an easy smile that dimmed when he saw Clara in the window. She recognized him vaguely from town, Sam Martinez, who ran the telegraph office. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Sam hand John a telegram. Saw John's expression darken as he read it. They spoke for a few more minutes before Sam remounted and rode off. John stood in the yard for a long moment, staring at the paper in his hand before heading toward the house. "Bad news?" Clara asked when he entered the study. "Interesting news." He handed her the telegram. It was from Judge Whitaker in Cheyenne. Brief and to the point. "Received your letter. Federal Marshal Thomas Mitchell arriving Willow Creek in 3 days. Will investigate claims. Advise your witness to be ready." 3 days, Clara breathed. "But Victor said 2, which means we need to keep you safe for 1 day after your brother's deadline." John's jaw tightened. He won't wait quietly for the marshal. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Clara noticed John had brought his rifle to the table. The significance wasn't lost on her. He expected trouble before morning. "Tell me about the scar," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Mrs. Chen made a disapproving sound, but John held up a hand. "It's all right." He was quiet for a moment, then began speaking in a low, measured tone. "Her name was Elizabeth. We were engaged, planning to marry in the spring of '78. She was beautiful, accomplished everything a man could want. What I didn't know was that she was also in love with someone else, someone who couldn't offer her respectability or wealth." Claire remained silent, watching the play of emotions across his face. "The night before our wedding, she came to me in tears, confessed everything. She'd been seeing him for months, was carrying his child. She begged me to marry her anyway, to give the child a name, promised she'd be a good wife." John's hand unconsciously touched his scar. "I was young, proud, furious. I said things I shouldn't have. Told her to leave, that I never wanted to see her again." "That wasn't unreasonable," Clara said softly. "Perhaps not. But her lover was listening outside. He thought I'd heard her crying. He came in with a knife." John's voice was flat, emotionless. "We fought. He was drunk, desperate. The knife caught me here." He traced the line of the scar. "And here. I managed to disarm him, but in the struggle he fell, hit his head on the fireplace. He died instantly." Clara gasped softly. "Oh, John." "Elizabeth screamed that I'd murdered him, that I was a monster. The sheriff arrested me that night. I spent 3 months in jail before Judge Whitaker reviewed the case and ruled it self-defense." John's smile was bitter. By then, the damage was done. Elizabeth had spread her version of events. In town, I became the scarred killer who'd murdered a man in jealous rage. But that's not what happened. The truth rarely matters when the story is better. John pushed his plate away. "I kept to myself after that, built this ranch away from town gossip. It's been 3 years. Most people have forgotten the details, just remember to be afraid of the scarred rancher." Clara reached across the table, impulsively covering his hand with hers. "I'm not afraid of you." John stared at their joined hands, something vulnerable flashing across his features. "You should be. Getting involved with me, even as an employee, puts you at risk. The town already whispers about any woman who comes here." "Let them whisper," Clara said fiercely. "They whisper about me too, the mad Dawson girl who stole from her family. Perhaps we're well matched in our reputations." Before John could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. A rock had come through the kitchen window, a note tied around it. John was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, but no further attack came. Mrs. Chen picked up the rock, untying the note with steady hands. Her face paled as she read it. "It's for Miss Clara." Clara took the paper with trembling fingers. Victor's handwriting was unmistakable. "You have until dawn. Come alone to the old mine, or I'll burn the ranch with everyone inside. Don't test me, sister." "He's lost his mind," Clara whispered. "No," John said grimly. "He's desperate. He knows about the marshal coming." At Clara's surprised look, he added, "Sam mentioned seeing one of Victor's men near the telegraph office. They probably bribed someone to share any interesting messages." "Then I have to go," Clara said, standing. "I won't let him hurt you or Mrs. Chen because of me." John caught her arm gently but firmly. "You're not going anywhere." "You don't understand. Victor doesn't make idle threats. When we were children, he burned down the neighbor's stable because they complained about his horse trampling their garden. He'll do it, John. He'll burn this place to the ground." "Let him try." John's voice was steel. "This ranch has faced prairie fires and survived. We can handle one desperate man with delusions of power." But Clara heard what he wasn't saying, that defending against Victor meant violence, possibly death. She thought of Mrs. Chen, who'd shown her nothing but kindness, of John, who'd risked everything for a stranger. She couldn't let them pay for her choices. That night, Clara lay in bed, fully dressed, waiting. When the house finally settled into sleep, she crept downstairs, avoiding the creaky third step she'd noticed that morning. The pistol was a weight in her pocket as she eased open the front door. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the yard. Clara had made it halfway to the barn when a figure stepped out of the shadows. "Going somewhere?" John asked quietly. Clara's heart nearly stopped. "How did you—" "I know the look of someone planning something foolish. I've worn it myself." He moved closer, and she could see he was fully dressed, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "If you're determined to meet your brother, I'm coming with you." He said alone, "And you believed him, Clara. He's not planning to negotiate. This is a trap." "I know," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "But what choice do I have? I can't let him hurt you." John stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cold night air. "You're not letting anyone do anything. These are my choices too, and I choose to stand with you." "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Why do you care what happens to me?" For a moment, John didn't answer. Then his hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle. "Because you looked at me in town and saw a man, not a monster. Because you're brave and honest and deserve better than living in fear. Because—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Because I care for you more than is wise or proper, given how short a time we've known each other." Clara's breath caught. "John?" "We can discuss this later," he said, dropping his hand. "Right now we need to decide. Do we wait for your brother to come here, or do we face him on ground of our choosing?" Before Clara could answer, the night sky lit up with orange flame. In the distance toward town, something was burning. "The old mine," John said grimly. "He's burning the abandoned buildings near it, trying to draw us out." More fires sparked to life, creating a line of flame visible even from the ranch. Clara understood the message. Victor was showing them what he was capable of, what he would do if she didn't come. "Saddle the horses," John said suddenly. "We're ending this tonight." "You're not going without me." Mrs. Chen's voice came from the doorway. She stood there in a traveling cloak, a shotgun in her hands. "That boy threatens my home. He deals with me too." "Mrs. Chen," John began, "don't argue. You'll need someone watching your back while you watch hers." The older woman's expression was fierce. "I didn't survive the journey from China to America to be frightened by a spoiled man-child with matches." Within minutes, they were mounted and riding toward the flames. Clara's heart pounded with each hoofbeat, fear and determination warring in her chest. The old mine was a collection of abandoned buildings from a failed silver venture 5 years ago. She'd been there once with her father back when he'd considered investing. As they approached, they could see Victor's men arranged around the main building, torches in hand. Victor himself stood in front of the mine entrance, and Clara's blood ran cold when she saw he wasn't alone. 2 figures knelt beside him, hands bound, Sam Martinez and his young wife Mary. "Insurance," John said quietly, understanding immediately. "He grabbed them to make sure we'd come." They dismounted at the edge of the firelight, and Victor's smile was triumphant. I knew you'd come, Clara. You always were too soft-hearted. Let them go, Victor, Clara called out, stepping forward. This is between us. Yes, it is. So come here, sister. Come home where you belong, and everyone walks away unharmed. Clara started forward, but John caught her arm. Wait. He studied the scene, his eyes sharp. Something's wrong. This is too easy. That's when Clara saw it, movement in the shadows behind them. More men cutting off their retreat. They were surrounded. Victor laughed. Did you really think I'd leave anything to chance, Mr. Mercer? Drop your weapons? All of you. Or Sam and his pretty wife die first. To emphasize his point, one of his men pressed a gun to Mary's temple. She whimpered, and Sam struggled against his bonds. Don't hurt them, Claire said desperately. Please, Victor, I'll come with you. Just let everyone else go. You'll come anyway, Victor said coldly. But first, I think Mr. Mercer needs a lesson about interfering in family business. He nodded to his men, and 3 of them advanced on John. Clara tried to move toward him, but Victor grabbed her arm, yanking her against him. Watch, he hissed in her ear. Watch what happens to people who help you. The first man to reach John went down fast, the butt of John's rifle catching him in the jaw. But there were too many, and without his weapons, John was overwhelmed. They forced him to his knees, and Victor's man raised a club. No! Clara wrenched free from Victor's grip the pistol she'd hidden, coming up in her hand. Stop or I'll shoot. Victor laughed. You won't shoot me, sister? You don't have it in you. Maybe not you, Clara said, swinging the pistol toward the man holding Mary. But I'll shoot him, and then the next one. How many of your hired thugs are willing to die for your money, Victor? The courtyard went very still. Clara's hand was steady, now her fear crystallizing into cold determination. You've changed, Victor said, his voice different now, uncertain. You changed me, Clara replied. Every threat, every bruise, every moment of fear you created this. Now let them go, or start counting how many men you're willing to lose. A sound cut through the tension, horses approaching fast. Many horses. Victor's head snapped toward the sound, and his face paled in the firelight. Federal Marshal, a voice bellowed. Everyone drop your weapons. Marshal Thomas Mitchell rode into the courtyard with a dozen deputies, their badges glinting in the firelight. His eyes took in the scene quickly, the hostages, the armed men, Clara, with her pistol raised. Victor Dawson, the marshal said, dismounting. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and now kidnapping. This is a family matter, Victor protested. My sister is delusional. Your sister sent detailed testimony to Judge Whitaker, the marshal interrupted. Along with some very interesting documents Mr. Mercer collected. We've been investigating you for months, Dawson. This just gave us what we needed. Victor's composure finally cracked completely. With a snarl of rage, he pulled a hidden derringer from his coat, aiming at Clara. If I'm going down, you're coming with me. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the confined space, but it wasn't Victor's derringer. John had thrown himself forward, knocking Clara aside as Victor fired. The bullet caught John in the shoulder, spinning him around, and Clara screamed. In the chaos that followed, Victor tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Mrs. Chen's shotgun blast took his legs out from under him. He went down howling, clutching his knee. That's for threatening my home, Mrs. Chen said calmly, breaking the shotgun to reload. Clara was already at John's side, pressing her hands against the wound in his shoulder. Blood seeped between her fingers, warm and terrifying. Don't you dare die, she said fiercely. Not now, not for me. John's hand covered hers, his grip surprisingly strong. Takes more than a bullet to kill me, he managed. Besides, we have things to discuss, remember. The marshal's men quickly took control, arresting Victor's hired thugs and freeing Sam and Mary. A doctor was summoned from town, arriving as dawn began to break over the mountains. Clara refused to leave John's side as the doctor worked extracting the bullet and binding the wound. He'll be fine, the doctor assured her. Missed anything vital. He'll be sore for a while, but no permanent damage. Victor, his legs splinted and bound, was loaded into a prison wagon. As it prepared to leave, he called out to Clara. This isn't over. Father will get me out. You'll see. Marshal Mitchell approached Clara with a document. Your father already knows, Miss Dawson. We contacted him yesterday. He's disowned your brother and named you sole heir to the estate. Seems he finally learned the truth about which of his children was worth believing. Clara stared at the paper, unable to process this reversal of fortune. After everything her father had chosen her, there's more, the marshal continued. The investors Victor cheated want to thank you for your courage. There's a substantial reward for information leading to his arrest. You're a wealthy woman now, Miss Dawson. Wealthy, free, safe. Everything she dreamed of when she was hiding in that alley, freezing and afraid. But as Clara looked at John, pale but steady, at Mrs. Chen standing guard with her shotgun at the ranch hands who'd ridden to help when they saw the fires, she realized something. I already have everything I need, she said softly. John's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Does that mean you're staying? Clara thought of the scarred rancher who'd saved her from the cold, who'd stood between her and danger, who'd taken a bullet meant for her. She thought of quiet evenings in the kitchen of ledgers that needed organizing, of a life that was simple but real and honest. If you'll have me, she said. I believe I offered you a job. John said, his eyes warm despite the pain, though I might have another position in mind now. Oh, it requires a lifetime commitment, room and board included, of course. Clara laughed, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Mercer, are you proposing to me while bleeding from a gunshot wound? Seems as good a time as any, he replied, though I'd prefer to do it properly when I can kneel without falling over. Mrs. Chen snorted. About time. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the barn until you figured it out. As the sun rose, fully painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Clara helped John to his feet. He leaned on her, solid and warm and alive. Let's go home, she said. Home. John repeated the word, carrying weight and promise. Yes, let's go home. They made their way slowly back to the ranch, the marshal and his men dealing with the aftermath of Victor's crimes. Clara knew there would be trials testimony, probably scandal, as the full extent of her brother's deeds came to light. But that was for tomorrow. Today, she had survived. More than that, she had found something she'd never dared hope for. Not just safety or shelter, but belonging. Not just protection, but partnership. Not just a house, but a home. As they reached the ranch, John stopped looking down at her with those steady gray eyes. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For being brave enough to trust me. For seeing past the scar and the stories. For staying. Clara reached up, tracing the line of his scar with gentle fingers. Thank you for being worth trusting. For standing with me when no one else would. For catching me when I fell. Always, John promised. I'll always catch you. And standing there in the morning light, bloodied but unbroken. Clara believed him. She'd traded herself for shelter, expecting nothing but survival. Instead, she'd found everything's safety purpose and a love forged in fire and proved in blood. The scarred rancher and the runaway heiress, it sounded like something from a dime novel. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was just beginning. Mrs. Chen ushered them inside, fussing over John's wound and insisting Clara eat something. Life continued around them, the ranch hands starting their morning chores, the horses needing tending, the accounts still waiting to be properly organized. But for a moment, sitting in the kitchen where it all began, Clara allowed herself to simply breathe, to exist without fear, to imagine a future that stretched beyond mere survival. John's hand found hers across the table, their fingers intertwining naturally, as if they'd always belonged that way. Neither spoke, but words weren't necessary. They had found each other in the darkness, two broken people who discovered they were stronger together than apart. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang across the prairie, carrying away the smoke from the night's fires. It was a sound Clara was learning to love, the sound of wide-open spaces, of possibility, of freedom. She was home. The week following Victor's arrest passed in a strange blur of activity and quiet moments. John's shoulder healed slowly, and Clara found herself taking on more responsibilities around the ranch, discovering she enjoyed the physical work as much as the accounting. She was feeding the chickens one morning when a familiar figure appeared on the horizon, riding slowly toward the ranch. Her father looked older than when she'd last seen him, his once proud shoulders bent with what she recognized as shame. Clara's hand stilled on the feed bucket as William Dawson dismounted, removing his hat as he approached. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion. My dear girl. She stood frozen, unable to reconcile this humble man with the father who had turned his back when Victor's rage had first shown itself. Why are you here? To beg your forgiveness, though I don't deserve it. William's eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. The marshal showed me the documents, told me everything. How Victor threatened you, hurt you, drove you to run. How I... His voice broke. How I failed you. You chose him, Clara said, surprised by how steady her voice remained. Every time. Even when Mother begged you to see what he was becoming. I know. I wanted so badly to have a son to carry on the business to build an empire. I was blind. William took a shaky breath. Your mother would be ashamed of me. From the porch, John watched silently, his arm still in a sling, but his presence reassuring. Clara drew strength from knowing he was there ready to intervene if needed. What do you want from me, Father? Nothing. I came to give you this. He pulled out a leather folder thick with documents. The estate, the business, everything. It's all yours as it should have been. I've also included evidence I found in Victor's room, more crimes, more victims. The marshal will want to see them. Clara took the folder with numb fingers. Inside were deeds, bank documents, and at the bottom her mother's jewelry, the pieces she'd thought lost forever. Your mother wanted you to have these on your wedding day, William said softly. I know I have no right to ask, but might I stay to see you married if there's to be a wedding? Clara looked toward John, who gave an almost imperceptible nod, leaving the decision to her. She thought of her mother, who had always believed in forgiveness and second chances. You may stay in town, she said finally. Whether you attend the wedding, we'll see. William's shoulders sagged with relief and sorrow combined. That's more than I deserve. Thank you, Clara. As her father rode away, John came to stand beside her. That was brave, he said quietly. Was it I feel like a coward? Part of me wanted to send him away forever. But you didn't. That's what matters. John's good hand found hers. Speaking of weddings, I believe I owed you a proper proposal. Before Clara could respond, riders appeared again on the horizon, several of them moving fast. John tensed, then relaxed as he recognized them. The Hendersons from the Double Bar Ranch, and the Millers. And is that Judge Whitaker? Indeed it was, along with what seemed like half the respectable families from the surrounding ranches. They dismounted in the yard, and Clara was surprised to see many of them carrying packages and baskets. We heard what happened. Mrs. Henderson said, a sturdy woman with kind eyes. How you stood up to that villain saved the Martinez family. We also heard, she glanced meaningfully between Clara and John, that there might be a wedding coming. News travels fast, John muttered, but Clara saw he was fighting a smile. We brought gifts, Mrs. Miller added, younger and more enthusiastic. Fabric for a dress, food for the celebration. It's time this ranch had some joy again. Judge Whitaker approached, his dignified bearing unchanged despite the dust of travel. Miss Dawson, Mr. Mercer, I've brought the final papers from Cheyenne. Victor Dawson has been formally charged with 15 counts of fraud, 3 counts of kidnapping, attempted murder, and arson. He won't see freedom for a very long time. Good, Clara said firmly. Then softer. Thank you for believing me. Thank Mr. Mercer, the judge replied. His word carries weight, even when delivered by telegram. Now, about this wedding I keep hearing about. John actually blushed, the color stark against his scarred cheek. I haven't properly asked yet. Then what are you waiting for? Mrs. Chen called from the porch. All these people didn't ride out here to watch you shuffle your feet. A ripple of laughter went through the gathered crowd. John looked at Clara, a question in his eyes, and she nodded. Here, surrounded by neighbors who had come to celebrate rather than gossip, felt right. John carefully lowered himself to one knee, wincing slightly at his shoulder. From his pocket, he pulled a simple silver ring, worn and beautiful. Clara Dawson, he began, his voice carrying across the yard. You came into my life half frozen and fighting for survival. You've turned my ordered existence upside down, made me remember what it's like to hope for something beyond mere existence. You've seen my scars, both visible and hidden, and haven't run. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Clara's eyes filled with tears, but they were joyful now. John Mercer, You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me shelter when I had none, protection when I was hunted, and love when I thought I was unworthy of it. Yes, I'll marry you." The crowd erupted in cheers as John stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her. "That was my mother's ring," John said quietly for her ears alone. "She would have loved you." The rest of the day became an impromptu celebration. Tables were set up in the yard, food appeared as if by magic, and someone brought out a fiddle. Clara found herself swept into the warmth of community she'd never expected to find. As the sun began to set, she noticed a lone rider approaching. Her chest tightened with familiar fear until she recognized him, Sam Martinez, still bearing bruises from his ordeal. "Miss Dawson," he said, dismounting carefully. "I wanted to thank you properly. If you hadn't come that night, if you hadn't stood up to him—" He swallowed hard. "Mary and I owe you our lives." "You owe me nothing," Clara said firmly. "Victor hurt you because of me." "No." Sam shook his head. "He hurt us because he was a monster who thought money gave him the right. You stopped him. That makes you a hero in my book." As the evening wore on, Clara found herself overwhelmed by the acceptance, the celebration of her and John's happiness. These people who had every reason to shun them both, the scarred rancher with his violent past and the runaway girl with her scandalous story, had chosen to embrace them instead. "It's because you fought," Mrs. Henderson explained when Clara expressed her amazement. "Out here we respect courage. You both showed plenty of that." The party continued into the night, but eventually the guests departed, leaving promises to help with wedding preparations. Clara and John sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the clear Wyoming sky. 2 weeks, John said suddenly. "What?" "The wedding. 2 weeks from today. Unless you want more time." Clara thought about it. She dreamed of a grand wedding once when she was young and naive. White dress church full of society people, reception at the country club. But that girl was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love wasn't about display, but about truth. 2 weeks is perfect, she said. The next morning brought a surprise visitor, Marshall Mitchell, his expression grim. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Victor escaped during transport to the federal prison." Clara's blood turned to ice. "How?" "Had help. Some of his hired men who weren't at the mine that night. They ambushed the transport wagon, killed 2 deputies. The marshal's face was hard. "I'm sorry, Miss Dawson, but until we recapture him, you're in danger." John's hand found Clara's shoulder, steady and reassuring. "He'll come here," John said. It wasn't a question. "Most likely. I can leave some deputies in—" "No," John interrupted. "This is our land, our fight. We'll handle it." The marshal looked skeptical. "Mr. Mercer, with respect, your shoulder is healing fine, and I'm not alone." John glanced at Clara. "We faced him before. We'll do it again." After the marshal left, promising to keep them informed, Clara found herself pacing the study, fear and anger warring in her chest. "I should leave," she said suddenly. "Draw him away from here." "Absolutely not." John's voice was firm. "We stand together, remember." "But the ranch?" "Mrs. Chen, the hands, I won't have more people hurt because of me." John crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. "Listen to me. This ranch has weathered storms, fires, and worse. The people here choose to stay knowing the risks. We protect our own, and you're one of us now." That night Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at her window watching the moonlit yard, every shadow potentially hiding Victor. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "It's me," John's voice came through. "May I come in?" She opened the door to find him fully dressed, rifle in his good hand. "Can't sleep either." "I keep thinking I see him," Clara admitted. "Every sound, every movement." "He's not here yet. When he comes, we'll know." John hesitated, then said, "Stay in my room tonight. It has better sight lines and—" He paused, color rising in his cheeks. "I'll sleep better knowing exactly where you are." It was improper, scandalous even, but Clara was past caring about propriety. She followed him to his room, larger than hers, with windows on 2 walls providing clear views of the approaches to the house. "Take the bed," John said, settling into a chair by the window. "I'll keep watch." "We could take turns," Clara suggested. "I won't sleep anyway. Might as well be useful." Clara lay down fully clothed on top of the covers, her pistol within reach. Despite her fear, John's presence was calming, and she found herself drifting off. She woke to the sound of horses. Many horses. Dawn was just breaking, and John was already at the window, his expression grim. "How many?" Clara asked, joining him. "8, maybe 9. He pointed to movement near the barn. "They're surrounding the house." Clara's heart pounded, but her hands were steady as she checked her pistol. "What do? We give them what they're not expecting." John moved to his wardrobe, pulling out a second rifle. "Can you shoot distance?" "My mother taught me." "Good woman." John handed her the rifle. "Take the east window. I'll take the west. Don't shoot unless you have to, but if you do, don't miss." They took their positions just as Victor's voice rang out across the yard. "Clara, I know you're in there. Come out, and I promise no one else gets hurt." "Your promises mean nothing," Clara called back. "You killed 2 deputies, Victor. There's no coming back from that." "They were in my way, just like your scarred rancher is in my way. But I'm feeling generous. Send him out, come with me, and Mrs. Chen lives. Otherwise—" A torch flared to life in the pre-dawn darkness. Then another, and another. "He's going to burn us out," Clara breathed. "No," John said calmly. "He's going to try." He raised his voice. "First man to touch flame to my property dies." "That's a promise, Dawson," Victor laughed. "You can't shoot all of us, Mercer." "Don't have to, just have to shoot you." John's rifle was steady, aimed directly at Victor. "Your hired thugs won't be so loyal when you're dead." For a moment, the standoff held tension, crackling in the morning air. Then Clara heard it, more horses approaching fast. "Mr. John," one of the ranch hands called from the barn. "Riders coming. Lots of them." Victor heard it too, his head snapping toward the sound. His face paled as he recognized the lead rider, Marshal Mitchell, accompanied by what looked like a full cavalry unit. "Federal troops," John said with satisfaction. The marshal called in favors. "Your brother's a federal fugitive now, Clara. The army takes that seriously." Victor's men began backing away, realizing they were vastly outnumbered. Several dropped their torches and raised their hands immediately, but Victor himself wasn't surrendering. With a snarl of rage, he spurred his horse toward the house, pistol raised, aimed at the window where Clara stood. She didn't think. The rifle came up smooth and natural, just like her mother had taught her. The shot was clean, catching Victor in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. The cavalry surrounded him in seconds, and Clara found herself shaking, the rifle slipping from numb fingers. John was there, immediately pulling her against him. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "It's really over." Marshal Mitchell approached the house as the soldiers rounded up Victor's men. "Miss Dawson, that was a clean shot. Probably saved his life, actually. A little lower, and it would have been fatal." Clara wasn't sure if she was relieved or disappointed. "Will he live long enough to stand trial and hang for murdering my deputies?" The marshal's expression was grim satisfaction. "You won't have to worry about him again." As they loaded Victor into a wagon, he caught Clara's eye. His face was twisted with pain and hatred, but also something else, disbelief perhaps, that his younger sister had been the one to bring him down. "You were always too much like Mother," he called out, his voice weak but venomous. "Too soft, too trusting." "No," Clara replied, standing tall despite her shaking. "I'm exactly like Mother, strong enough to stand up to bullies even when they're family." Victor had no response to that, and Clara watched as they took him away out of her life forever. The drama of the morning seemed to have brought out the entire town. By noon, the ranch was full of people again, but this time their purpose was clear: to help prepare for a wedding. "Can't have you getting married without a proper dress," Mrs. Henderson declared, producing a beautiful length of cream-colored silk. "My daughter's wedding dress. She'd be honored if you'd wear it." Clara was overwhelmed by the generosity, the community embrace of her and John's union. Even some of the townspeople who had shunned John for years appeared, offering awkward but sincere congratulations. "Seems saving the Martinez family and stopping a murderer changes people's perspectives," John observed dryly. 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Clara's father remained in town, sending daily letters, asking for forgiveness for a chance to be part of her life. She wasn't ready to fully forgive, but she allowed him to help with the wedding preparations, seeing it as a small step toward healing. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect. Mrs. Chen helped Clara into the borrowed dress, which fit as if it had been made for her. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Chen said, tears in her eyes. "Mr. John won't know what hit him." The ceremony was held in the yard under a bower of wildflowers the ranch hands had constructed. It seemed the entire territory had come to witness the union of the scarred rancher and the brave young woman who'd brought down a criminal. But Clara saw only John standing at the makeshift altar, in his best suit, his gray eyes warm with love and promise. The scar that had once defined him seemed insignificant now, just another part of the face she'd grown to love. Judge Whitaker officiated, his sonorous voice carrying across the gathered crowd as he spoke of love forged in adversity of courage, in the face of danger of two people choosing each other despite the odds. When John kissed her, sealing their union, the crowd erupted in celebration. But Clara barely heard them, lost in the reality that she was safe, loved, and home. The reception lasted well into the night. Stories were told of their courage, songs were sung, and more food than Clara had ever seen was consumed. Her father approached once tentatively, offering his congratulations and a wedding gift, her mother's piano which he'd saved from the estate. "She would have wanted you to have it," he said simply, then retreated before Clara could respond. As the evening wound down, John took her hand, leading her away from the crowd to a quiet spot by the corral. The horses nickered softly, and the stars spread infinite above them. "No regrets?" He asked, his arm around her waist. Clara thought of the journey that had brought her here, the fear, the hunger, the desperation of that cold alley. Then she thought of this man who'd offered her shelter, and so much more of Mrs. Chen's fierce protectiveness of neighbors who'd become friends of a life built on truth and courage rather than fear and lies. "No regrets," she said firmly. "This is where I belong." John turned her to face him, his expression serious. "I need you to know something. That first night when I found you in the alley, I wasn't just saving you. You saved me too. I'd been living half a life hiding from the world, from the possibility of being hurt again. You reminded me that some things are worth the risk." Clara reached up to trace his scar, the mark that had once defined him, but now seemed just a small part of their larger story. "We saved each other," she said, "and we'll keep saving each other every day." As they stood there, the wedding guests beginning to disperse, the ranch settling into nighttime quiet, Clara felt a peace she'd never known before. The girl who'd hidden in an alley, freezing and afraid, was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd faced her demons, claimed her freedom, and found love in the most unexpected place. "Mrs. Mercer," John said, testing the words. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Clara replied, standing on her toes to kiss him again. "So do I." In the distance, a wolf howled, but it no longer sounded threatening. It was just another voice in the Wyoming night, part of the wild beauty of this place she now called home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, running the ranch, dealing with her inheritance, building a life together. But tonight, in the arms of the man who'd seen her at her worst and chosen to love her anyway, Clara was simply perfectly happy. The house was quiet when they finally went inside. The last of the guests departed. Mrs. Chen had tactfully retired to her quarters, leaving the newlyweds alone. John led Clara to their room now, and she felt a flutter of nerves that had nothing to do with fear. "We have time," John said softly, understanding her hesitation. "All the time in the world." And they did. Time to learn each other, to build trust into something deeper, to transform a marriage born of crisis into one of true partnership. As Clara settled into John's arms, she thought of her mother, who had always told her that love wasn't just a feeling, but a choice made daily, to stand with another person against whatever came. She'd made her choice, and despite everything, or perhaps because of everything she knew, it was the right one. The first months of marriage passed in a rhythm Clara had never known before, peaceful yet purposeful, each day, bringing its own small satisfactions. She woke this particular morning in late autumn to find John already gone, his side of the bed cool to the touch. Through the window, she could see him working with a new horse, his movements patient and deliberate, despite the animal's skittishness. His shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a faint scar to join the collection that mapped his history. Clara dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen where Mrs. Chen was already preparing breakfast. The older woman smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. 3 months married and still watching him like that, Mrs. Chen observed. Good. Means the fire hasn't died. Before Clara could respond, the sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. Through the window, Clara saw an elegant carriage out of place on the rough ranch roads. Her chest tightened with apprehension until she recognized the passenger, Margaret Whitaker, the judge's wife, accompanied by a younger woman Clara didn't know. "Mrs. Mercer," Margaret called warmly as Clara emerged onto the porch. "I hope we're not intruding. This is my niece, Rebecca Sterling, visiting from Boston." Rebecca was everything Clara had once been: perfectly coiffed, expensively dressed, carrying herself with the unconscious confidence of someone who'd never questioned her place in the world. But there was something in her eyes, a shadow Clara recognized. "Please come in," Clara offered, noting how Rebecca's gaze lingered on John in the corral, then flickered away when she noticed his scars. Over tea, Margaret explained their visit. "Rebecca is recovering from some unpleasantness in Boston. A broken engagement. Her parents thought some time in the West might do her good." "He spread lies about me," Rebecca said suddenly, her cultured voice bitter. "When I refused to overlook his gambling debts and mistresses, said I was hysterical, unstable. No one in Boston will receive me now." Clara's hand found Rebecca's across the table. "I understand. My own brother tried to paint me as mad when I discovered his crimes. It's a convenient weapon men use when women become inconvenient." Rebecca's eyes widened. "You're the one who exposed Victor Dawson. I heard about it even in Boston. They say you shot him yourself." "I did what I had to do to protect my family," Clara said simply. John entered then, having seen the carriage. He nodded politely to the ladies, but Clara saw his wariness. Strangers still made him uncomfortable, especially those who stared at his scars the way Rebecca was trying not to. "Mr. Mercer," Margaret said warmly, "I was just telling your wife that Rebecca will be staying with us through the winter. I hoped Clara might help introduce her to local society." "What society there is," John said dryly. "This isn't Boston, Miss Sterling." "Thank God for that," Rebecca muttered, then colored. "I apologize. That was rude." "But honest," John replied, and Clara saw him relax slightly. "Honesty counts for more than manners out here." After their guests left, Clara found John in his study, frowning over a letter. "What is it?" she asked, recognizing his troubled expression. "Your father. He's asking to visit for Christmas." Clara took the letter, reading her father's careful words. He'd been writing regularly, each letter full of remorse and tentative hope. She'd responded occasionally brief notes that gave little away. "What do you think?" she asked John. "It's your decision, but—" he hesitated. "I think your mother would want you to try. Family is complicated, but it's still family." Clara thought of her mother, always quick to forgive, always believing people could change. "Perhaps a short visit," she conceded. The next few weeks brought unexpected friendship with Rebecca Sterling. The Boston socialite proved surprisingly adaptable, helping with ranch work without complaint. Her initial shock at the scars and rough manners of the ranch hands giving way to genuine interest in their stories. "You're all so real," she said one afternoon, helping Clara with the accounts. "In Boston, everyone wears masks. Here, people just are who they are." "That's not always a blessing," Clara warned. "When people don't hide their nature, you see the bad along with the good." As if to prove her point, Tom Bradley appeared at the ranch the next day. Victor's former thug looked different, thinner. Hollow-eyed, his swagger replaced by something desperate. John met him at the gate rifle, visible, but not raised. "You're not welcome here, Bradley." "I know. I'm not here to cause trouble." Bradley's voice was rough. "I'm here to warn you. There's talk in the saloons. Some of Victor's old associates, they blame you for his hanging. They're planning something." Clara had joined John by then, her hand on the pistol she still carried. "Why warn us?" Bradley looked at her with something like shame. "Because I got a daughter, Mrs. Mercer, about your age. When I heard what Victor was really doing, what he planned for you, I got to thinking, what if someone did that to my girl? I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can do one right thing." "What are they planning?" John asked, all business. "Don't know exactly, but they've been watching the ranch, know your routines. And they know about the Boston lady visiting. Figure she might be worth ransom money. After Bradley left, John and Clara stood in the yard processing this new threat. We should tell the marshal, Clara said. Already planning on it, but we need to be ready ourselves. John looked toward the house where Rebecca was helping Mrs. Chen with dinner. She needs to know the danger. Rebecca took the news with surprising calm. So I've traded Boston's subtle cruelties for Wyoming's blunt ones. At least here, enemies announce themselves. That night, Clara couldn't shake her unease. She'd thought Victor's death would end the danger, but violence had a way of breeding more violence. She found herself at her mother's piano playing softly in the darkness. John appeared in the doorway, watching her. You play beautifully. You never told me. There hasn't been much music in me lately, Clara admitted. But tonight, I needed to remember that beautiful things still exist. He sat beside her on the bench, his solid presence comforting. They do. We're proof of that. We took something ugly, fear, betrayal, violence, and built something beautiful from it. Before Clara could respond, glass shattered in the kitchen. Then came the smoke, acrid and thick. Fire. Mrs. Chen, Clara called, but the older woman was already moving, grabbing the water buckets they'd prepared after Bradley's warning. Through the broken window, Clara saw them 5 men, maybe 6 torches in hand, but these weren't hired thugs. These men moved with military precision, surrounding the house strategically. Professional guns, John said grimly. Someone paid well for this. The fire was spreading along the kitchen wall, and Clara realized with cold certainty that they couldn't fight both the flames and the men outside. Then she heard it, Rebecca screaming from upstairs. Without thinking, Clara ran toward the stairs, but John caught her arm. Together, he said firmly. We go together. They found Rebecca struggling with a man who'd climbed through her window. John's fist connected with the intruder's jaw, sending him stumbling backward through the window he'd entered. The man's scream was cut short by the ground below. Can you shoot? John asked Rebecca urgently. My father taught me. She gasped. John handed her a rifle from the hallway cabinet. Good. Stay with Clara. Shoot anyone who comes through that door who isn't me or Mrs. Chen. The smoke was thickening, and Clara could hear the fire spreading. They needed to get out, but the men outside were waiting for exactly that. The root cellar, Mrs. Chen said, appearing with soot-streaked face. The old tunnel to the barn. Clara had forgotten about the tunnel dug years ago as cold storage, but abandoned when the new ice house was built. They made their way down the smoke following them, and Clara tried not to think about being trapped underground if the house collapsed above them. The tunnel was narrow, dark, barely tall enough for John to stand upright. They moved in single file, John leading with his rifle ready. Behind them they could hear shouts, the crash of timber as parts of the house gave way. They emerged in the barn to find 2 men waiting. The fight was brutal and quick, John using his rifle as a club when there was no room to shoot Clara, and Rebecca defending Mrs. Chen, who despite her age wielded a pitchfork with deadly efficiency. When it was over, both intruders were down, and they could see through the barn doors that the house was fully engulfed. Clara's heart broke watching their home burn, all their carefully built peace going up in flames. My piano, she whispered, thinking of her mother's gift. It's just a thing, John said, but she heard the pain in his voice too. This ranch had been his refuge, his rebuilding after Elizabeth's betrayal. The sound of approaching horses made them all tense, but it was Judge Whitaker with a group of townsmen drawn by the flames, visible for miles. Margaret sent me when Rebecca didn't return for dinner, the judge explained, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. Looks like we're just in time. The remaining attackers fled when they saw the reinforcements, but one was caught. A professional gunman from Denver who under pressure revealed who'd hired them. Elizabeth Thornton, he said, and Clara saw John go rigid. Said she wanted the ranch burned, everyone in it dead, paid us $5,000. Elizabeth, John's former fiancée. Clara felt cold rage rise in her chest. She's supposed to be in California, John said, his voice hollow. She's in Cheyenne, the gunman corrected. Has been for months. Planning this. Judge Whitaker took charge, sending men after the fleeing attackers and another group to Cheyenne to arrest Elizabeth. Clara stood with John watching their home burn, Rebecca and Mrs. Chen beside them. We'll rebuild, Clara said firmly. With what? John's voice was defeated in a way she'd never heard. The ranch accounts were in there. The records. Everything. Not everything, Clara said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a small ledger. I've been keeping duplicate books in the barn. Mother always said to have copies of anything important. John stared at her, then pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. What would I do without you? You'll never have to find out, Clara promised. They spent the night at the Whitaker Ranch, Rebecca insisting they take her room while she bunked with the judge's daughters. Clara lay awake, John's arms around her, processing the loss and the revelation about Elizabeth. Why now? She asked into the darkness. Why would she come back now? The wedding announcement, John said after a moment. It was in the Denver papers. Maybe she couldn't stand the thought of me being happy. Or maybe she heard about my inheritance, Clara said, a new thought occurring. Father's estate is worth a fortune. Maybe she thought if we were dead, she'd have some claim as my former fiancé. John's arm tightened around her. It doesn't matter now. She'll hang for this. But the next morning brought unexpected news. Elizabeth had disappeared from her Cheyenne hotel, leaving behind evidence that made Clara's blood run cold, detailed plans not just for the attack, but for afterward. Documents suggesting Clara had started the fire herself, that she was unstable like her brother. A forged will, leaving everything to Elizabeth as John's rightful bride. She's more dangerous than I thought, Judge Whitaker said grimly. And she's not working alone. These forgeries are professional work. Clara thought of Victor, how he'd built his web of lies and crimes. It seemed evil was never truly solitary. It always found allies, others willing to profit from destruction. We need to find her, Clara said. We need to protect you, John corrected. Both of you, he added, glancing at Rebecca. You were seen helping us. That makes you a target too. Rebecca lifted her chin with surprising determination. Then I'll stay and fight. I'm tired of running from bullies. They returned to the ranch to assess the damage. The house was gone, reduced to smoking timbers and ash. But the barn stood, the bunkhouse was intact, and most importantly, the ranch hands who'd been in town during the attack were safe and eager to help. We'll have a new house up before winter sets in properly, the foreman promised. Better than before. As the men began clearing debris, Clara found herself at the remains of the piano. The metal frame had survived twisted but recognizable. She touched it gently, remembering her mother's hands on the keys. We'll get you another one, John said behind her. It won't be the same. No, but maybe that's all right. We're not the same people we were. Maybe we need new things for our new life. Before Clara could respond, a rider approached Marshal Mitchell, his expression grim. We found Elizabeth, he said without preamble. Dead, shot left in a gulch outside Cheyenne. Clara felt no satisfaction, only a weary recognition that violence begat violence. Who? Professional work, clean shot long distance. Someone wanted her silenced. The marshal studied them. This isn't over. Whoever was backing her play is still out there. That night in the bunkhouse, they were temporarily calling home. Clara and John held counsel with Mrs. Chen and Rebecca. We could leave, Clara suggested, though the words pained her. Start over somewhere else. No, John said firmly. This is our land. We stand and fight. But fight who? Rebecca asked. If Elizabeth's dead and the gunmen scattered. Follow the money, Mrs. Chen said suddenly. Someone paid Elizabeth, paid the gunmen. Someone with enough money to orchestrate all this. Clara's mind raced. Who had that kind of money and motivation? Who would benefit from their deaths? The answer came from an unexpected source. Her father arrived the next day, earlier than planned for Christmas, his face grave. Face. I know who's behind this, he said without preamble. Charles Thornton, Elizabeth's father. He's been buying up land rights, planning a railroad spur. Your ranch sits right in the path. With you dead and Elizabeth inheriting, he'd have had the land, John finished. His own daughter. He used his own daughter. She was willing enough, William said grimly. But yes, he's the money behind it all. And Clara, there's more. He was one of Victor's partners. Some of the documents you exposed implicated him. He has every reason to want you dead. Clara felt the weight of it, the interconnected web of greed and violence that seemed to stretch endlessly. But looking around at these people, her husband, her friend, her father trying to make amends, Mrs. Chen, steady as stone, she also felt something else. Determination. Then we end it, she said. We expose him like we exposed Victor. We fight back with truth. It won't be easy, her father warned. Thornton has powerful friends, good lawyers. But we have something better, Rebecca said unexpectedly. We have proof. Elizabeth was many things, but she was meticulous. If she was working with her father, she kept records. They all looked at her. Rebecca smiled grimly. I've been staying at the Whitaker Ranch. Elizabeth's belongings were brought there after her death. I may have looked through them. And, Clara prompted, letters, telegrams, financial records, everything needed to prove Charles Thornton orchestrated not just this attack, but several others. He's been forcing people off their land for years. Judge Whitaker, when presented with the evidence, was coldly furious. I'll issue the warrants myself. Thornton will answer for this. But Thornton had one more card to play. He arrived at the ranch the next day with a full legal team and a document that made Clara's heart sink, a bill of sale for the ranch allegedly signed by John, dated before the fire. Obviously forged, John said flatly. Prove it, Thornton said with a cold smile. He was an older version of Elizabeth. Same calculating eyes, same cruel set to the mouth. Your records burned in the fire. Convenient, wasn't it? Clara stepped forward. Actually, Mr. Thornton, our records are quite intact, including the accounts showing John's presence here on the date that document was supposedly signed in Denver. Thornton's smile faltered. You're lying. Am I? Clara produced her duplicate ledger, then added the coup de grace. We also have your daughter's letters, including the one where she details the forgery plan. The color drained from Thornton's face. Elizabeth is dead. You can't prove she wrote anything. Actually, we can, Rebecca said, stepping out from the barn where she'd been waiting. I have her diary, her real one, not the sanitized version you had someone create. Every crime, every plan, every payment, it's all there. Thornton lunged for Rebecca, but John was faster, his fist connecting solidly with the older man's jaw. Thornton went down hard, and Marshal Mitchell, who'd been waiting out of sight, stepped forward with shackles. Charles Thornton, you're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, arson, and fraud. As they led him away, Thornton looked back at Clara with pure hatred. You think you've won? You've made enemies you can't imagine. This isn't over. It is for you, Clara replied steadily. The trial was swift. With the evidence they'd compiled, Thornton's guilt was undeniable. He was sentenced to life in federal prison, his assets seized to compensate his victims. Part of that compensation came to Clara and John, enough to rebuild the house grander than before. But Clara insisted on something different. Not grander, she told the architect. Stronger, built to last, built for a family. John looked at her sharply, understanding dawning in his eyes. Clara smiled, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. Spring, she said softly. The baby will come in spring. John pulled her against him, his embrace fierce with joy and protective love. A baby, he breathed. Our baby. Our future, Clara corrected. The house rose from the ashes as winter deepened the frame strong against the sky. Rebecca stayed to help finding purpose in the rebuilding. Clara's father visited regularly, each interaction slightly less awkward, the relationship slowly mending. One evening, as snow began to fall, Clara stood in what would be their new parlor. Rebecca and Mrs. Chen beside her watching John and the men work. You've all lost so much, Rebecca said quietly. How do you keep going? Mrs. Chen answered. Because the alternative is letting them win. Every day we rebuild, we choose hope over fear. Clara touched her growing belly, feeling the first flutter of movement. We keep going because that's what the living do. We survive, we rebuild, we love despite the risk. Even knowing more violence might come, Rebecca asked. Especially then, Clara said. That's when love matters most, when it's dangerous, when it costs something. That's when it's real. That night in their temporary quarters, John held Clara close, his hand splayed protectively over their child. I never thought I'd have this, he admitted. A wife, a child, a future. After Elizabeth, I thought that part of my life was over. And I thought I'd die in that alley, Clara reminded him. But here we are, scarred but whole, tested but not broken. Together, John said the word, a promise. Together, Clara agreed. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, covering the scars of fire and violence. But beneath the snow, the earth waited, ready for spring's growth, the cycle of destruction and renewal as old as the land itself. Clara thought of the journey that had brought her here, from privileged daughter to desperate fugitive to beloved wife and soon-to-be mother. Every loss had led to something gained. Every scar had become a story of survival. The new house stood complete by late February, its walls sturdy against the winter winds that still swept across the Wyoming plains. Clara moved through the rooms slowly, her hand supporting her growing belly, while John and the ranch hands carried in the new furniture. Every piece had been chosen with care, not for show, but for the life they were building together. The nursery should be here, Clara said, standing in the sunny room adjacent to their bedroom. Close enough to hear the baby at night. John wrapped his arms around her from behind his hands, joining hers over their child. Our son or daughter will be the most protected child in Wyoming, he murmured against her hair. After everything we've faced, I believe it, Clara replied, leaning back into his warmth. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her face bright with excitement. The piano has arrived. They're bringing it in now. Clara hurried as fast as her condition allowed to the parlor, where workers were carefully positioning a beautiful new instrument. It wasn't her mother's piano, but as she ran her fingers over the keys, producing a clear, sweet sound, she felt a different kind of connection. This piano had no past, no ghosts, only future melodies waiting to be played. Play something, John urged, and Clara sat carefully on the bench, her fingers finding their way into a gentle lullaby her mother used to sing. The music filled the new house, christening it with something other than words or work, with beauty, with hope. That evening, as they gathered for their first dinner in the new dining room, Clara's father arrived unexpectedly, his face grave. William Dawson had aged considerably in the months since Victor's death, but his eyes were clear now, no longer clouded by denial or favoritism. I've received word from Denver, he said without preamble. There are complications with the estate transfer. Clara's heart sank. What kind of complications? Victor had debts we didn't know about. Gambling debts to dangerous people. They're claiming rights to the estate assets. John's expression hardened. How much? Nearly half the estate's value. And Clara... William hesitated, then continued. They know about your inheritance. They've made threats. Of course they have, Clara said wearily. It seemed violence was destined to follow her no matter how far she ran or how much she tried to build something good. Who holds these debts? John asked, already thinking strategically. A man named Marcus Rourke. He runs gambling operations from Denver to San Francisco. Victor apparently owed him for almost 2 years, kept promising payment after he took control of the family fortune. Rebecca, who had been quiet during dinner, suddenly spoke. I know that name. Marcus Rourke was connected to several Boston families. My former fiancé mentioned him, said he was not someone to cross. Clara felt the baby move restlessly, as if sensing her distress. What does he want? Money primarily, but also... William pulled out a letter. He wants to meet. Here. He says he has a proposition. John read the letter, his jaw tightening. He's coming here whether we agree or not. This is just a courtesy notice. 3 days later, Marcus Rourke arrived with an entourage that made Clara think of a funeral procession, all black carriages and stern-faced men. Rourke himself was not what she expected. Instead of the thuggish brute she'd imagined, he was elegantly dressed, well-spoken, with intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Mercer, he said, removing his hat politely. Mr. Mercer, thank you for receiving me. They met in John's study, Clara insisting on being present, despite John's protests about her condition. Rebecca stayed too, a silent but steady presence. Your brother owed me $75,000, Rourke said without preamble. With interest, it's now closer to $90,000. Clara gasped. It was an enormous sum, more than the ranch was worth. Victor's debts died with him, John said flatly. Legally, perhaps, but I'm not a man who relies solely on legal channels. Rourke's tone remained pleasant, but the threat was clear. However, I'm also a businessman. I prefer negotiation to violence. What do you want? Claire asked directly. Rourke smiled, slightly appreciating her directness. Your brother promised me something more valuable than money: information. He claimed to have documents that could destroy several of my competitors' evidence of their crimes that could see them imprisoned or hanged. And you want these documents. I want to know if they exist. Victor was many things, but he was meticulous about keeping leverage. If these documents exist, they're worth far more to me than the money he owed. Clara thought of the papers she'd found in Victor's study, the ones she'd hidden before fleeing. Documents she'd never fully examined, focused as she was on evidence of his crimes rather than others. If such documents existed, she said carefully, what would you do with them? Remove threats to my business. Nothing that would concern law-abiding citizens like yourselves. John leaned forward. And if we could provide these documents, the debt would be forgiven. More than that, you'd have my protection. My word that no one connected to me would ever trouble you again. It was a devil's bargain, Clara knew, but she also knew they had little choice. Rourke's men could make their lives a misery or worse. I need time, Clara said, to see if such documents exist. Rourke stood. 3 days, Mrs. Mercer. I'm staying in town. After he left, Clara turned to John. The documents are real. I hid them in the old mine before I ran. The mine that Victor burned. The buildings burned. The mine shaft itself should be intact. I hid them deep inside, wrapped in oilcloth. John was already reaching for his coat. I'll go now. Not alone, Clara insisted. And not you. Your shoulder is fully healed. But you're too recognizable. If Rourke's men are watching, Clara turned to Rebecca. You could go. With some of the ranch hands. Make it look like a pleasure ride. Rebecca nodded immediately. I'll go at dawn. Less suspicious. That night Clara couldn't sleep. The baby was active and her mind raced with possibilities. What if the documents were destroyed? What if Rourke didn't keep his word? What if this was all an elaborate trap? John pulled her closer. Stop thinking so loud, you'll wake the baby. The baby's already awake, Clara said, guiding his hand to where tiny feet were kicking. Strong, John murmured, like the mother. I'm tired of being strong, Clara admitted. I want peace. I want our child to grow up without fear. Then we'll make it happen, whatever it takes. Dawn came too soon. Rebecca set off with 2 ranch hands, ostensibly for a morning ride to see the sunrise from the hills. Clara watched from the window until they disappeared from view, then tried to distract herself with household tasks. Mrs. Chen found her reorganizing the same shelf for the 3rd time. Worrying won't make them return faster, the older woman said gently. I know, but I can't help feeling we're making a mistake. Giving those documents to Rourke, we don't know what he'll do with them. Sometimes there are no good choices, Mrs. Chen said, only necessary ones. It was past noon when Rebecca returned muddy but triumphant, a leather satchel in her hands. The mine shaft was partially collapsed, but we got through. These were exactly where you described. Clara opened the satchel with trembling hands. Inside, wrapped in deteriorating oilcloth, were dozens of documents. As she read through them, her blood ran cold. Victor had collected evidence of crimes that made his own embezzlement look tame murder, trafficking corruption at the highest levels of territorial government. This is dynamite, John said quietly. Rourke could destroy half of Denver's underworld with this. Or control it, Clara added. They spent the rest of the day copying what they could, creating their own insurance. If Rourke betrayed them, at least they'd have something to fight back with. The next morning, Rourke returned as promised. Clara handed him the satchel without ceremony. Everything Victor collected, she said, as you requested. Rourke examined the documents carefully, his expression growing more satisfied with each page. Your brother was more thorough than I expected. This is valuable. Then our business is concluded, John asked. Almost. Rourke pulled out a document of his own, a receipt acknowledging Victor's debt as paid in full. And this but Another paper, yeah, a letter of protection. Anyone under my employ who troubles you will answer to me personally. Clara took both documents, relief washing over her. But Rourke wasn't finished. A word of advice, Mrs. Mercer. Your brother made enemies beyond me. Some are still out there waiting. Be careful. After he left, Clara felt simultaneously lighter and more burdened. They'd eliminated one threat, but Rourke's warning echoed in her mind. The peace lasted exactly 1 week. Clara was in the garden planting spring flowers despite the lingering cold when she heard horses approaching fast. Too fast. She struggled to her feet, one hand supporting her belly, the other reaching for the pistol she still carried. But it wasn't threats that arrived. It was Marshal Mitchell, his face grim, accompanied by Judge Whitaker. Mrs. Mercer, we have a problem, the marshal said. Charles Thornton escaped during a prison transfer, killed 2 guards. The blood drained from Clara's face. Thornton, who blamed her for his daughter's death and his downfall. John asked, having heard the commotion, and joined them. 3 days ago. We've been tracking him. The trail leads here. Clara's hand went protectively to her belly. He's coming for us. Most likely, I'm posting deputies around the ranch. No, John interrupted. That didn't work before. We need a different approach. That night they held a war council. Clara, John, Rebecca, Mrs. Chen Marshall Mitchell, and Judge Whitaker gathered in the study. Thornton's desperate, the judge said. He has nothing left to lose. That makes him more dangerous, Rebecca observed. She'd grown harder these past months, the soft Boston socialite, replaced by someone who'd learned to survive. We could leave, Clara suggested, though the words pained her. Go somewhere he can't find us. You're 8 months pregnant, John reminded her gently. Travel would be dangerous. Staying might be worse. Mrs. Chen, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke. In China, we have a saying, the hunter who chases 2 rabbits catches neither. Thornton wants revenge, but he also wants to survive. Give him a reason to choose survival. What do you mean? Clara asked. Offer him a deal. Safe passage out of the territory in exchange for leaving you alone. Marshal Mitchell shook his head. I can't make that deal. He killed lawmen. But I can, Judge Whitaker said slowly. If he surrenders to me, I can arrange a trial that might result in exile rather than hanging. It's not justice, but it might prevent more bloodshed. John stood abruptly. You're asking us to let our would-be killer walk free. I'm asking you to think about your wife and coming child, the judge replied steadily. Is revenge worth risking their lives? Before anyone could answer, a shot rang out, shattering the study window. Everyone dove for cover as more shots followed. He's here, Clara gasped, crouching awkwardly behind John's desk. John was already at the window with his rifle scanning the darkness. Multiple shooters. He's not alone. The marshal ran for the door. I'll get to my men. Another shot, and the marshal cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell back inside. Nobody's going anywhere, Thornton's voice called from outside. Not until I get what I came for. What do you want, Thornton? John shouted back. Justice. That bitch killed my daughter, destroyed my life. Your daughter died because of her own choices, Clara called out, anger overriding fear. Just like you're making yours now. Shut up. You don't get to speak about her. More shots peppered the house. Rebecca had gotten to the marshal, pressing cloth against his wound. Judge Whitaker was surprisingly calm, a pistol in his weathered hand. We need to get Clara to safety, John said. The root cellar. No, Clara interrupted. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding. This ends tonight. She stood despite John's attempts to stop her moving to the window. Charles Thornton. You want justice? Then face me. One-on-one. No hiding behind hired guns. Clara, no. John grabbed for her, but she evaded him. You claim I destroyed your life. You destroyed your own life with greed and violence. But if you want someone to blame, then face me directly. Or are you too much of a coward? Silence stretched taut. Then Thornton stepped into the light from the burning torch he carried. He looked haggard, aged decades and months, his expensive clothes replaced by trail-worn gear. You'd face me pregnant and weak. I'm carrying a child, and I'm still less weak than you, Clara shot back. You're nothing but a pathetic old man who used his own daughter and then let her die alone. Thornton's face contorted with rage. He raised his gun and time seemed to slow. Clara saw John moving, trying to get a clear shot. She saw Rebecca raising the marshal's rifle. She saw Mrs. Chen appearing from nowhere with her shotgun, but it was her father who acted first. William Dawson had arrived silently during the confrontation, and now he stepped between Clara and Thornton's gun. "Enough," William commanded. "You want someone to blame for your losses? Blame me. I'm the one who raised Victor to be what he was. I'm the one who chose my son over my daughter. Every terrible thing that followed stems from my failures as a father." Thornton hesitated, confused by this unexpected intervention. William continued, moving slowly closer to Thornton. "You and I were the same. We put ambition over family, greed over love. We created the monsters our children became. But Clara, she broke the cycle. She chose courage over compliance, truth over comfort. Don't punish her for our sins." "Get out of my way, old man," Thornton snarled. "No, you'll have to shoot me first, and then John will kill you before you can fire again. Your men will scatter, hired guns always do when their employer falls. You'll die for nothing, having accomplished nothing." Clara watched in amazement as her father stood firm, protecting her in a way he never had before. "Or," William continued, "you can take Judge Whitaker's deal. Surrender, stand trial, possibly live. Your choice: die tonight for certain, or have a chance at life." Thornton's gun wavered. The silence stretched unbearably. Then from the darkness came new sounds, horses, many of them. "That would be my men," a familiar voice called out. Marcus Rourke stepped into the light, flanked by a dozen armed riders. "Mr. Thornton, you're causing problems in my territory. That ends now." Thornton spun toward this new threat. "This isn't your business, Rourke. Mrs. Mercer is under my protection. That makes it very much my business." Rourke's voice was pleasant, but his men's guns were aimed steadily at Thornton and his hired shooters. Clara realized that Rourke must have been watching, waiting. The documents she'd given him had bought more than just freedom from debt. They'd bought an ally, however dangerous. Thornton looked around wildly, realizing he was outmaneuvered. His hired guns were already backing away, unwilling to face Rourke's men. "Drop the weapon," Judge Whitaker called out. "Surrender to me and you'll get a trial. Continue this and you'll die in the next 10 seconds. Thornton's face cycled through rage, desperation, and finally defeat. The gun fell from his hand into the muddy ground. Marshal Mitchell's deputies, who'd been pinned down, quickly moved in to arrest Thornton and what remained of his men. Rourke tipped his hat to Clara through the window, then disappeared into the night with his riders as quickly as he'd come. William Dawson stood swaying, and Clara realized he was injured, blood seeping through his coat, where a bullet had grazed him during the confrontation. "Father!" Clara rushed to him as fast as her condition allowed, catching him as he stumbled. "It's nothing," William said, though his face was pale. "A scratch. Worth it to do one right thing for my daughter." John was there, immediately helping support William's weight. "Let's get you inside. Rebecca, get the medical supplies." As they tended to William's wound, which was indeed minor, and the marshal's more serious injury, Clara felt the first contraction. She gasped, hand going to her belly. "Clara!" John was at her side instantly. "I think the baby—" Another contraction, stronger. "It's too early." "Only by a few weeks," Mrs. Chen said calmly, taking charge. "Excitement brings babies. Rebecca, hot water. John, help her to the bedroom. Judge, ride for the doctor." The next hours blurred together, pain and breathing, John's hand crushing in hers, Mrs. Chen's steady encouragement. The doctor arrived just as dawn was breaking, taking over with professional efficiency. "The baby's coming fast," he announced. "Everything looks good, just early." Clara wanted to laugh at the understatement. After everything, the violence, the threats, the fear, their child was choosing to arrive in the aftermath of yet another battle. But when the baby finally emerged, squalling and perfect, all of that faded away. "A daughter," the doctor announced, placing the tiny, wrinkled form on Clara's chest. Clara looked down at her daughter through tears, seeing John's gray eyes and her own stubborn chin already evident in the tiny features. "She's perfect," John whispered, his voice broken with emotion. One finger traced the baby's cheek with infinite gentleness. What will you name her? Rebecca asked from the doorway where she stood with Mrs. Chen and even William, who'd insisted on being helped from his sickbed. Clara looked at John, and understanding passed between them. Hope, Clara said. Hope Elizabeth Mercer. After everything you'd name her partly for, Rebecca started, surprised. Elizabeth was broken by her circumstance, shaped by her father's greed. Our daughter will carry the name differently as a reminder that people can choose to be better than their origins. William approached slowly, respectfully. May I meet my granddaughter? Clara nodded, and William gazed down at Hope with wonder and regret mingled in his expression. She'll have better than we gave you, he promised quietly. I swear it. Over the following days, as Clara recovered and Hope thrived despite her early arrival, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Thornton was tried and sentenced to life imprisonment. Judge Whitaker had kept his word about sparing him the noose, though Thornton would never again see freedom. Rebecca surprised everyone by announcing she would stay permanently. I found more family here than I ever had in Boston, she explained. If you'll have me, I'd like to help raise Hope. She'll need an aunt who teaches her that ladies can also shoot straight and ride hard. The ranch hands built an addition to the house for Rebecca, and life began to take on the shape Clara had dreamed of in her darkest moments. Peaceful, purposeful, filled with love rather than fear. One evening, as spring fully claimed the Wyoming landscape, Clara sat on the porch with Hope in her arms. John beside her, watching the sun set over their land. The baby gurgled contentedly. Tiny fist wrapped around John's scarred finger. Do you think it's over? Clara asked. The violence, the threats, maybe not forever, John said honestly. But for now, yes. We've faced the worst and survived. Clara thought of their journey from that frozen alley to this moment of peace. Every scar had been worth it to reach this place. I never thanked you properly, she said, for saving me that night. John turned to her, his expression soft in the golden light. You saved me too. Before you, I was just existing, hiding from the world. You brought me back to life. Hope made a small sound, drawing their attention. Looking down at their daughter, Clara saw the future stretching ahead, challenges, certainly, but also joy growth, the chance to build something lasting. We should write it down, Clara said suddenly. Our story. So Hope knows where she came from, what we overcame. The scarred rancher and the desperate heiress, John said with slight smile. The two broken people who found each other and built something whole, Clara corrected, who chose love over fear, courage over safety, truth over comfortable lies. As if in agreement, Hope opened her gray eyes, fully gazing up at her parents with that mysterious wisdom newborns sometimes possess. William appeared in the doorway, moving carefully but steadily. He'd stayed to recover from his wound and to know his granddaughter. I've had word from Denver, he said. The last of Victor's associates have been arrested. Rourke's information helped the federal marshals clean house. The territory is safer for it. It was strange to think they owed anything to a crime lord, but Clara had learned that life rarely offered perfect solutions, only workable ones. Will you stay? Clara asked her father, the question carrying more weight than the simple words. William looked at his daughter, son-in-law, and granddaughter, the family he'd nearly lost through his own blindness. If you'll have me, I have much to atone for. Everyone deserves a second chance, Clara said, thinking of all the second chances that had brought them here. Mother would want us to try. That night, as Clara nursed Hope while John read beside them, she thought about the girl who'd hidden in an alley, certain she would die alone and unmourned. That girl could never have imagined this, a home built on love, rather than fear, a family chosen and fought for a future bright with possibility. What are you thinking? John asked, setting aside his book. About how far we've come. About how grateful I am. For what specifically? Clara looked at him, this scarred, steady man who'd offered her shelter and given her so much more. For you seeing me in that alley, for being too stubborn to let me push you away, for standing between me and every threat, for loving me when I didn't know how to love myself. John moved closer, careful not to disturb Hope, and kissed Clara gently. I'm grateful too, for your courage, your trust, your determination to see past surfaces to truth, for choosing to stay when you could have run, for our daughter, for this life we've built. Hope finished nursing and dozed off, milk-drunk and content. Clara placed her carefully in the cradle John had built with his own hands carved with wildflowers and stars. Standing together watching their daughter sleep, Clara and John were living proof that sometimes the most beautiful things grew from the harshest ground. They'd been tested by fire, threatened by violence, nearly broken by loss. But they'd chosen to stand together to fight for something better to build rather than destroy. The moon rose over the Wyoming plains, silver light streaming through the windows of the house that had risen from ashes. In her cradle, Hope slept peacefully, protected by parents who'd paid in blood and tears for this peace. Rebecca's light still burned in her addition, where she was probably reading or planning tomorrow's lessons for Hope when she was older. Mrs. Chen hummed in the kitchen, preparing tomorrow's bread. William sat on the porch, keeping watch, a grandfather determined to protect what he'd once failed to value. This was family, not perfect, not without scars, but real and chosen and fierce in its love. Clara took John's hand, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. Ready for bed. In a moment, John said, pulling her close, I want to remember this, all of it, the peace we fought for. They stood in their daughter's nursery, two people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward light. Outside, the wind sang across the prairie, not a howl of threat now, but a lullaby of home. Clara thought once more of that desperate girl in the alley, trading herself for mere shelter. She'd received so much more love-purpose family home. The scared rancher had given her not just safety, but partnership. Together they'd transformed survival into living, existing, into thriving, fear into love. I love you, she whispered against John's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath his shirt. And I love you, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. Forever and through whatever comes. Hope stirred in her sleep, making small, contented sounds. The future stretched ahead, unknown but no longer frightening. They would face it as they'd faced everything else together, with courage, with hope. The house settled around them, solid and secure. This was their happily ever after. Not an ending, but a beginning, not perfect, but true, not without cost, but worth every price paid. Clara Mercer, once. Clara Dawson stood in her home surrounded by those she loved and who loved her in return. She'd traded herself for shelter and discovered that sometimes in the most unexpected ways, desperate trades could become precious gifts. The scarred rancher and the runaway heiress had become something more, partners, parents, survivors, who'd chosen to become thrivers. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Hope would grow, asking questions about her name, her heritage, the scars that marked her parents' bodies and souls. The ranch would face droughts and storms. Markets would rise and fall. Life would test them in new ways. But tonight, in this moment, they were simply a family at peace, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.